wherever I went, there were sacred places. In fact, one day we went to this place, and I didn't know, but that was one of the places where they say that there is a Jesus tombs. They said that that's he, after being on the cross, he left and he went to Kashmir.
Hello, everyone. I am Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire podcast. Welcome back to a new episode. My guest today comes from Italy, Antonella Vicini. Antonella, thank you for accepting my invitation.
Well, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be asked, actually. Very, very exciting, too.
Thank you. And I have to let the audience know that we have a common friend, Frederick Lerman. And this is how we got in contact, the two of us. In fact, I took a course with Hank Wesselman back in 2018, 2019, and I met Frederick, and later on he introduced me to you. And for the last 3 years, I think, I've been contributing to my short stories to your online magazine, The Badger.
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, it's true.
It's,
so we have 2 points of contact, actually. One is Fred, and one is Hank Wesselman and his courses. Yeah.
Yes. And your magazine is amazing. You put a lot of time and soul into creating this beautiful piece of literature.
Thank you so much. I'm touched. Well, would you like me to tell a bit more about the Badger?
Please go ahead.
Well, as you can see behind me, there is the Badger Productions, which is one of the latest changes in names. But the Badger stays the same, because the Badger is a very fierce animal that is usually other animals are afraid of a badger because it's so fierce. It's got these very long claws, and goes underground and goes to the roots of things. So it's a symbol of a persistent healer, the healer that never lets go until he or she has found the means to support somebody who is in need. And I'm saying healer in a very broad sense, anybody who is helping someone else in a situation of difficulty. And so this is also the name that I was given by my teacher, a Native American mystic, Joseph Rael, beautiful painted arrow, long ago. And I remember once we were talking, we were talking about names, and I knew that he had given spiritual names to Peter. I said, you didn't give me a name. And we were in the middle of a field. We were preparing for one of the dances, the first time that he came to Italy. And I said, you didn't give me a name. And he said, oh, okay. And we just looked at me and said, oh, you're a badger. And that was that. And I said, well, I didn't even know what animal it was, in English. I didn't have an immediate translation to Italian. So I checked. It's not very nice looking animal, And then I found out later on, much later on, years later, that was the clan from for his family. And so in a way that was like making me part of his family. And many years later, when I had an idea of a magazine where we could talk about all the keys to life that make life good, that make us feel good in life, and they can be all healing keys, whether it's art, literature, philosophy, science, good food, traveling, poetry, all the arts, and the medical arts as well. That the name was very easy, the Badger. Because the Badger is a persistent healer. So that's I'm still going. We started in 2014. That was number 0, and then now we are in the 11th years. And Joseph, he always said that the numbers from 1 to 10 are human numbers, and from 11 onwards they're divine numbers. So I don't know what's going to happen with the next numbers of the Badger, because now we are in the divine numbers. I don't know. It's very difficult.
Beautiful. And we'll get to Joseph Rael's story a little bit later in our discussion, but there is no coincidence that my background shows Sanskrit, because at one point in your life, early in your life, you fell in love with this ancient language. And I would like you to share how that happened and how it changed your life.
Well, first I met Latin. And then I met Greek and fell in love with Greek. It was a passionate love. And then I went to university and I decided that it would be a good idea to study Sanskrit, just because I was studying Latin and Greek, if it wasn't enough, you know. So then I went to the lesson, and when I saw the writing that you have behind you, which is the Devanagari writing, the one in the middle, the on top and the below is not Devanagari, but the one in the middle is a Devanagari. And Devanagari means the city of the gods. So this is the alphabet that is used in the city of the gods. Just the name was enough to make me feel in awe. And then this professor at university was writing these beautiful things on the board, and I fell in love with it. And I thought, okay, this is it. Now, little did I know that to become a Sanskritist, it takes 15 years. I gave up after 10, but not because I wanted to give up. It's just because I had to make a living somehow, you know, and I couldn't just study. And if you want to learn well and you become good at it, you really need to spend all of your time studying. It's a wonderful language. It's a marvelous culture. And I spent 4 years of my life at university studying it. And I did my dissertation on Sanskrit, and I had to translate things that had never been translated before in any language. And the topic was pilgrimage. And again, I didn't know that my whole life would have become a pilgrimage from one sacred place to another. So there's only one thing that I want to say about that is the word tirtha, which means place of pilgrimage. It actually literally means a ford, the place where you go across the river. So whenever you go to a tirtha, to a sacred place, you immerse yourself in the waters. But there is no other and no more sacred place than your heart. So when you go to the tirtha of the heart, then that's where you really immerse yourself in the waters and you are really cleansed and ready for ceremony. And so that's what I've been doing my life. Tirtha Yatra. Tirtha Yatra means the journey of pilgrimage, going to the sacred places. So, yeah.
And I know you visited India, and how it was for you to go there, not necessarily as a tourist, but as a scholar, and see that history and touch it and transpose what you learn in at university.
But the first answer that comes to me is it was very painful, because nothing had prepared me for the reality of India. I was really an academic, a scholar. I didn't know anything about India, really, I didn't. And I was completely plunged into it. I arrived in Mumbai, and it was just, I realized that all of my life counted for nothing there, because I had to learn other ways of surviving, and also of surviving the intense attack on my senses and also on my soul. I felt like crying all the time for the way people were living around me, for the poverty, for all the things that I saw around me. It just hurt me personally. It felt like a personal thing. It was not just, oh, I feel bad for them. No, it was very personal. So much so that at some point I got really sick. And that was a sickness that apparently everybody who goes to India with an open heart feels. Now everybody feels like they're dying. And in a way, you have to die and that was my first shamanic death, if you like. Even if I didn't know it could be called that at the time. But that was a death of the old. And when I returned to Italy, I changed completely my career, changed completely my horizons, and I started doing other things that I had not done before. So it was a very important time in my life. And I saw beautiful things that I'll never forget. And I really fell in love with the people, I thought that the people were wonderful.
Yes,
So,
it's a magnificent place, very intricate. And 2 weeks ago, I mean, we are recording this interview beginning of March, but on the third week of February, the 12-year cycle Kumbh Mela finished. And initially I thought they gonna have, 30, 40 million people. But I think they put everyone to shame. They had 500 million, 4,000 acres of tents and people living there for more than a month, I think 6 weeks in total. it's quite inconceivable for someone from the West.
Yeah. When I went to Kashmir at some point because it was so hot in the plains. And I didn't know at the time, but when I realized that there was a big pilgrimage going on to a famous Shiva Lingam in one of the caves in Kashmir. It was a Shiva Lingam made of ice, that people could only see for a certain period of time. And I met many pilgrims. I mean, many, many pilgrims who had traveled sometimes by train. Many of them had traveled on foot from south of India, from central India, all the way to Kashmir. It was, and I talked, and it was amazing just to see this. And wherever I went, there were sacred places. In fact, one day we went to this place, and I didn't know, but that was one of the places where they say that there is a Jesus tombs. They said that that's he, after being on the cross, he left and he went to Kashmir. So he returned to India, basically, because there are many stories saying that he went there. So for me, it was a kind of surprise. I didn't know any of that. I was so, yeah, it was so new. Everything was so new to me then. I was very young. And I'm, I learned a lot on that journey. I learned a lot about myself as well. Like every time you go to India, I think you learn about yourself.
Yes, I think people over there live their life in a continuum pilgrimage. And if they don't do it daily, they do it at least physically once a year to a site like one in Kashmir, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. But that's why, studying the Tirtha Yatra, the traditional Tirtha Yatra, was amazing for me to see it in everyday life. Like people were sitting all over places and making food and living on the platforms, waiting for the next train because they were going somewhere. They had made a vow, they were going somewhere. And there were specific rules for the pilgrimage. You really had to let go of everything that was not needed on the pilgrimage in order to do it, because the pilgrimage was in itself a cleansing process until you reach your place. And for me, my pilgrimage was to Mathura, which was a place that I had studied for my dissertation, the birthplace of Lord Krishna, one of the avatars of Vishnu, one of the reincarnation of Vishnu. And I went there, and on the day when it was the Krishna Janmashtami, so it was the day of the naming of Krishna. So it's like Christmas sort of thing, but it was August, it was super hot. And they were going to have a sacred representation. And before that, I went to the temples and they wanted to show me around. And then I saw all these paintings. I said, oh, this is from this text. This is from that text. And they were just looking and said, how do you know this? Because I've read them all. At the time I remembered everything, not now, but yeah, it was an amazing experience for me, to go really to the center of a place that I had studied for 2 years, because it took me a long time to do my dissertation. So, yep.
And now going back to the North American continent and your relationship with Joseph Rael, as you mentioned, because also it was an important connection and relationship in your life. How did that happen?
As I said, it happened also because of India. In 1986, I met rebirthing, a breathing technique. And also after I left India, when I left India, I decided that I was going to go to England to learn rebirthing. So I did. I stayed for 6 months and I went to rebirthing school. And I also met Reiki, hands-on healing. And that was my first degree at the time. And that really, I think, at about two things combined, especially the work with Reiki, really opened doors that I didn't know were open for me. When I received the first degree initiation in Reiki, and for the first time, I put my hands on somebody's head, I suddenly realized that my hands had changed. They were not the same hands anymore. In fact, I remember I looked at them and I thought, what's different? But my hands knew. My hands knew what to do. I had no idea what they were doing because my mind was mental, academic. But my hands knew, and they were touching and they were feeling and they were giving me information. And so I remember during the course, we had to do some practices on each other. And I did a practice on somebody who I found out later was a psychic. And I didn't even know who a psychic was at the time. And I was very ignorant of the practices. But anyway, and I gave her the treatment and it felt very natural to me, like I'd always done it. And I told her that afterwards. And she looked at me and she said, yeah, because you are an old soul and you've been doing this for a long time. And at that point, I kind of was frozen because I thought, oh my God, they have discovered me. Now, it has taken me many years to find out what that meant to me. I'm going to tell you later. Anyway, continue with rebirthing and Reiki, and I received a 2nd degree Reiki. I started to organize in Italy, and I even opened in a school in rebirthing, and I was in 1991 became a Reiki master as well. And every summer I used to go to England anyway. And that particular summer, 1989, I wanted to go to America, but I couldn't. I was married at the time and my husband had to do things in England. He was English, so I mean, we went to England. And I found this, I was at somebody's house, and a Reiki master's house, and she had this little flyer saying, Joseph Ryle, no photo, no description, nothing. So he's going to teach chanting and dancing in this little village where we were going to go, because it was where my husband's sister was at the time. So we were going there anyway. So I thought, okay, I have to do this. I have to go. So my friend called and they said that, you know, they didn't have much space. It's during the night. After that, I don't know. I thought, no, I am going. He has to tell me I cannot go. What? How did I know that? Why did I say that? Anyway, the following day, I called and they said, we don't know what happened, but there is place. I said, oh yeah, I knew I had to go. So I went. And imagine the least native thing possible, the least American thing place, you know, a little English house with a little garden in front, a back garden, you know, kind of very English furniture and all these people sitting on the floor and in this living room. And then this little man, and he looks at me, I look at him, and he stands up and he gives me a cushion to sit on. I sit on this cushion and I start to cry. And then, you know, people were introducing themselves and I was crying. And then when it was my time to say who I was, I remember I sobbed. I stood up, I sobbed, and I said, I'm Antonella, I'm coming from Italy. This is very important to me. Whoa! I sat down again. It was ridiculous. Anyway, then we did some exercises together. And I remember one of them was the sound of sitting greatness. And he told us what to do with sound. And he didn't tell us anything. He said, if you really want to visualize something, you can visualize a light coming from above, meeting a plane. And that was actually the female meeting the male, not in the gender wise, but in the essence, you know, things, the creation. Anyway, so we did, but I didn't know that because he didn't explain that, of course. That came much later. And so I closed my eyes and I immediately heard this sound, and I saw these very tall trees that I'd never seen before, and they were moving their leaves in the wind. I thought, oh, beautiful. And then it gave another sound to do, a sound of standing greatness. So we were standing. And again, it didn't give us any air. I was doing the sound, and then I saw the same place, and behind that, there was a very tall mountain. So, and then explain other things that I can't remember. I don't remember. I remember I was crying and making notes, crying and making notes. There was a break, and he came. Suddenly, I found him in front of me, just like here, and said, "Are you better?" Started crying again, and I said, and then I sobbing. I told him what I had seen, and he looked at me, and he opened his arms, and he said, "Welcome." And I hugged him, or he hugged me. We hugged each other. And it felt like hugging a tree, like hugging a rock, like hugging somebody who was beyond. It was not just a person, it was more than a person, and somebody who was like me. For the first time in my life, I felt that this was somebody like me. I was not alone. I'd found somebody like me. And that's why the badger, that's why the book, you know, on the medicine wheel. That's why the novel that I've written, all of these things come from the many years that I've spent going to America to attend the dances that Joseph was organizing, to do the vision quest, to not understanding, being scared, being told that I was a tough cookie by him and not really getting what I was supposed to get. And one day he asked me, how long are you going to wait? And I said, for what? And he said, to be happy. And it has taken me a long time, but I think I'm there yet. And I'm there now. And I'm happy. Even if there is no particular reason to be happy, I'm happy. And that's, I think he taught me well, without teaching me anything, of course.
And do you have a definition for happiness right now?
I think that happy is to be who you are, not having to excuse yourself for who you are, and just do things little by little daily, without, even when it's many of them, like now at this point in my life, but with a heart that is always full of joy, full of energy, full of light. And sometimes I may be in a bad mood, but that doesn't mean that I'm not happy. In the past, I was always unhappy. And now I'm happy. So it's okay. You know, if sometimes things can happen that are not to my liking, but it's okay. I can deal with that. I think that's a big achievement. It has taken me almost 40 years. Not been very fast, but, you know, important thing is together. Not that I have reached, I don't know which high level of spirituality. I don't know. I feel like I'm always an elementary teacher, you know, and I like it that way. I like the idea of going to places where people have no idea of what I do and what, you know, what I can do, and just help people to discover the beginnings of a path, whatever the path is going to be like. You know, everybody's path is different, but I like that very much, and that's probably why I feel like I'm an elementary teacher.
Yes, and I think that if we go with humbleness, these new places you referred to, more will be revealed to us. And we have to have that awareness of humbleness and see what's going on, what's coming towards us, what we're going to learn from this new place, new people we are going to encounter.
Exactly, exactly. But you know, all the things that I'd been studying for many years, the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita that I love so much, that I've been studying and teaching a long time, all of these things made a lot more sense when I started to dance, when I started going to the womb of the sweat lodge, when I started to have a little bit more of understanding of what the medicine wheel is, and all of this without the mind. I didn't read any books about Native American people. I didn't want to. I wanted to try it out by myself. I read Joseph's books simply to remember things, but not, he doesn't really explain things. He's a typical teacher, even if he says that he's not a teacher, that he's not a shaman, that he's not a medicine man, he doesn't have any position of that kind. But he was sharing with us not the traditional teachings, because he's always said that were part of a Picuris Pueblo and a Southern Youth Pueblo, but he was teaching us his visions, and that's actually real traditional teaching. So he was teaching us what came out of his own visions. And of course, his own visions were influenced by the places he came from. But I found an understanding of all these lofty philosophical texts in, you know, the humble fire pit, in the humble pit in the middle of a sweat lodge. You know, when you realize that there are 2 dimensions, and there are 3, but then maybe there's 4, maybe there's 5, and maybe there's no end to it, and the mind boggles. And at the same time, you know that there is more, and it's okay not to understand it. And that for me was a big one, because my head was always, you know, first time, and I'll tell you, this is a funny story. First time I went to see Joseph in America, not in England. When I went to America, he gave me very elaborate description of how to get to his house, very complicated. And I followed them to the letter, you know, like everything, turn right, turn left, this, that. And I arrived, and he looked at me when I arrived and said, "Oh, you made it." And he had this kind of little smile on his face. And I thought, "Well, yeah, of course, you gave me instructions. I followed them." And he said, "Oh, okay, come in." It took me years to find out, but there was a much faster way to his place. And he had not given it to me. He had given me the complicated one because he wanted to know if I was going to follow some instructions. Even if sometimes I didn't later on, but at the beginning I certainly did.
Yes.
And the first thing that I did with him was in 1990, following years in America. First, he asked me to go for a sweat lodge, and I never done one. And immediately, as soon as I was in a sweat lodge, my eyes of vision, if you call it like that, just opened. I didn't need the drama, I didn't need anything. We're just seeing things. And then he asked me if I wanted to go and do the drum dance, which was a 4-day dance in the middle of nowhere in the desert, the Cebolla Forest. Cebolla Forest constitutes one tree in the middle of nowhere in a piece of land that was used by the astronauts to try out for the moon. So just imagine, it was nothing. It's wonderful, but it was nothing there. So I go there, and I'd probably been under a tent once or twice, not really liking it very much. But anyway, so we slept in a tent, but before sleeping, we had to clean the dance floor, the dance area around this tree, the one tree. And we were picking up stones in the desert with our bare hands. I asked, I said, oh, are there any animals that we might be aware of? And they said, oh yeah, there are coral snakes and rattlesnakes and tarantulas, which are really this big, and scorpions. And I said, oh, okay. And so, but you don't have to worry, because Joseph has already done the medicine circle, and they know we're here to dance. We're here for spirit. They're not going to bother us. So, oh, fine. So doing this and that, and yeah, I even walked barefoot at night to go to the toilets, because the rangers had given us the plastic toilets. They didn't want us to disturb the desert, and I was not afraid of anything. I was just an amazing. And when I returned after that experience, the first dance, when I returned back into the house, I could not sleep on a bed. It took me about a month to go back to sleeping on a bed. And it took me a full day to be able to stay inside and not feeling suffocated, because something happened then and I felt that my entire body had finally stretched to its full dimension. And so the animal part, or whatever you want to call it, was much bigger than this. Now I'm using Hank's terms. I would say this was Aumakua, that was saying, okay, look, like patting me on the back, said, hello, you're not alone. You have quite a few other beings with you. But I didn't know. I was just going with it. So it was, and that summer when I met Joseph in 1999, I also did a past life regression session with an amazing person. And so these two things really changed my life entirely. And I was like, oof. And after that, many times when I was doing sessions with people, I could see their past lives. I never told them unless they asked me, or when they found out, then I said something. Otherwise, I never said, but it was easy to see. So just like the eyes of vision opened up incredibly. But I remember all the time what I'd learned from India, that when you are on the spiritual path and you acquire lots of capacities, lots of skills, lots of things, but they are not the goal. The goal is liberation, the final freedom. Some samsara for India, I wouldn't be able to give it a definition myself, but anyway, the highest is that. And so I've never really used too much of these things, because I was concerned of overusing them and making them into a business. So I've always had a hard time with that. So yeah.
So during this, having this experience in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of nature, in fact, I think gives us the understanding why the indigenous like to be outdoors so much, because they see themselves one with nature, one with everything that is part of nature. And for us is indeed the opposite. We don't understand that mentality.
Also, there is one thing to add, that when you are in the desert, it's very clear that nature doesn't need us. We need nature. Because when you are in the desert, you're completely naked. There is nothing else. There is just you And, you know, and you are alone in front of the universe. I remember once I was driving through the Navajo reservation, a Diné reservation, and I stopped again, in the middle of nowhere, and there were these rolling waves of red stone. It was like a sea. I was born by the sea. So it was like a sea, but it was made of stone. And that was so clear. And there was nothing around. There was no vegetation, nothing, just that. And it was so beautiful, so beautiful. I felt so moved, you know, so, and yeah, that's when I thought that for the first time, I need to be one with nature, because otherwise there is no respect, there is no love. And I tried to stay in New Mexico longer, but since New Mexico is in America, it's very difficult, it's complicated, and yeah, I wouldn't do it now, I wouldn't go now.
Yeah. And Antonella, during one of these sweat lodge sessions, ceremonies, or in desert excursions, have you identified if you had any connection with indigenous life in a previous life?
When you know, after that time that we met in England, I and Joseph met quite a few times, and I went to America quite a few times, and he came to Europe to teach and all this. And one summer that I went, I can't remember exactly when it was, but early 90s, he said, I am going to do a vision quest. Would you like to go? And I said, oh, Joseph, I'm already doing the dance and this and that. You know, you're asking me, so you don't have to do it, you know, but if you want, I'll put your name down just in case you decide to do it. So I spent a week, said, okay, let's go. Okay, let's go. Of course, I went. When we suddenly arrived in this place, and this place was in Pecos, Pecos Mountain in New Mexico, and northern New Mexico. And we arrived with this Jeep, and then suddenly we go around the bend, and I see the trees that I'd seen the first time that I met him. And I jumped out of the car and I started screaming, Joseph, those are the trees. Because, you know, Italian, I couldn't hold it 1 minute. And I said, Joseph, these are the trees that I saw in the film. And I turned around, and sure enough, it was the same mountain as well. So he looked at me, he didn't say anything. He just took me by the hand. He put me in a circle of these trees, and he said, you do your vision quest here. And then at that point, there I was in the circle of aspen trees. There were aspen trees. And I started to cry and laugh at the same time. I said, I'm home, I've come back home. I was speaking English, Italian, a mess. I was crying and laughing and crying and laughing. And I spent my vision quest there. And I saw my family. I saw people who were older than my family. I saw the life there in the village. I saw some of the animals that have accompanied me all the time. And I was scared to death, you know, like an animal scare, always afraid. And it was so crazy that towards the end of it, I was happy and peaceful, because most of the time I was happy and peaceful, but I was sitting in front of my tent, kind of in a meditative state, and suddenly there was this hummingbird. And this hummingbird came very close to me, like here, you know. And then I heard the noise, and I got scared, and I said, ah! And he said, ah! And he went away. That, since hummingbird represents joy, for a long time, I threw joy away from my life. And I was delighted when I did another ceremony, and hummingbirds were coming close to me, and I was not afraid anymore. So it's... So yes, that was one of the memories, and not the only one. And there were many dreams, and some of these dreams, some of these visions have not even revealed their meaning, even if it was a long time ago. And some of them have. That's why some of the things I can tell, and some others I don't. So, but it was, it was a very precious experience. And seeing my family was so heartwarming. I was very little, so heartwarming, and I could see them on the other side of the tent, and they were there, and I felt very loved, you know. And I remember that I could see the perception that you have when you're very little, because I could see the legs of people. You know, I didn't see them all of them, but they were just, you know, I saw the legs, the feet, and everything. So everybody was taller than me. And I told Joseph about this. He's the only one who I told everything at the end. And he told me then, as I said, some years after we had met, that when he first met me, he knew I was from his family. And when that particular pueblo on Pecos was destroyed by the Spanish, part of that pueblo went to Picuris. And part of it was part of his family. And he said that. So when I saw me arriving in that place in England, he stood up because and gave me a cushion because I was part of a family. So that was very touching. But he didn't tell me straight away. I don't know, for a long time, I thought he was doing that with everybody, but then I realized it wasn't. So.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And are you allowed to use any of this process, the drumming, the dancing, the sweat lodge in a different setup like Italy, or it has to be done only with Joseph and people who are aware of the process in North America?
No. Actually, he came here to teach as well because he wanted us to do this. He had this beautiful teaching about the sound. In fact, one of his books is called Sound, and another one is called Being and Vibration, because he's always talking about the vibratory essence of things. And that to me, again, was very close to Sanskrit and the mantras and the sound of the Om, you know, all of these things that I was familiar with. So I was fortunate enough to learn drumming from some very good people, and in America and in Europe. And I'm still a student of a drum. Let's put it like this, because a drum is a sacred object. And he gave me two drums, actually. Joseph gave me two drums. One is about like this, and another one is a double-hide buffalo drum, which has got a very deep, earthy tone. And we have some songs, but we are not only supposed to sing during ceremonies. In fact, that's what I do. I only sing during ceremonies. And then there are some other songs that he has actually recorded, not him, yes, but somebody recorded for him on YouTube. So then those are okay. And some of them have to do, you know, most of them have to do with peace and love and understanding. And the language he uses is the Picuris, the language of Picuris Pueblo, which is a Tiwa language. He tried to teach us some, and I have to say I don't know much about it, but the sounds resonate very well. So, for example, one of the things that he taught us was when you have a dream that you don't understand, think of the most important aspects of the dream and chant it, sing it. If you sing only the vowels, you will go to the essence of this. If you want to make it more practical, more material, you also sing the consonants. It's just like giving it bones, you know, while the other one is just vibrates with it. And so we sing, I can sing the songs and I can drum the songs. And I have poured the sweat lodge whenever there was a ceremony. And I actually I was asked to chief the dance, the sun moon dance that he gave us. And I've done that 4 times in Italy. And that has been a wonderful experience. My dream is to actually be able to build a peace chamber, a sound chamber, which is inspired by the kiva constructions of the Picuris Pueblo, of the Pueblo people. You know, the kivas are either underground or half and half or above ground. It depends on the place, with only one entrance from the top, from the square. It's a circle with a square. And it is traditional way of including both male and female energies in this. And traditionally, in the native traditions, men do the ceremonies because they need to learn about suffering, and women don't, because they already do the suffering, you know, every month and when they give birth. So they don't need to do the suffering; they can do the dreaming. And these are really matriarchal societies in the best and most respectful way. I mean, I've always noticed that in Joseph's attitude. It really comes from a deep place of respect towards women, and something that we are not used to in our Western society, because it's not something that he has to think about. This is part of who he is, and that's very different. And well, I lost what I was saying. Anyway, so we have these around the world. There are all these peace chambers. So one of my dreams is to one day have a piece of land where I can place one of these sound chambers and have people go there and sing. Because even if you sing something very simple, like the vowel sounds, you know, he had us sing the vowel sounds many times, related to all the different points on the compass in the medicine wheel. That is enough to change the vibratory level of the people and the vibratory level of a place. And it makes a difference. So it's, yeah, this has been a big teaching, and it's very healing. Sometimes we were all chanting for supporting somebody who was in the middle and needed some healing. So you can just chant the name of a person without a vowel in that case, because you want to go to the essence, and that works too. So.
Yeah, and Antonella, you mentioned the feminine energy and the respect the indigenous people and Joseph in particular, but I know that there is a spread concept of respecting the feminine in the indigenous world. And you were born in the Catholic religion, which was a suppressor of the feminine energy and feminine in general because of their gifts. How do you see what you learned from the ancient world of indigenous, which they use these concepts and their visions for thousands of years, compared to a religion which is so new and at the same time, in my opinion, distorted?
This would be a long thing to answer, Claudio. Where do I start? Well, let's put it like this. Civilization for me ended in the 2nd century after Christ, and then was resumed much later in the Renaissance. Let's say that, yeah. I am glad that I have studied the ancient ones here as well. Remember, I studied Latin and Greek before Sanskrit. But I didn't study it on a superficial level. I studied on a very deep level. And although, well, not so much the Romans, but the Greeks were misogynist, and certainly they didn't think highly of women. But before them, and you can find it in the literature, there were many layers telling us that there was a cult, the matriarchal cult. Now I live, for example, among the Etruscans, the ancient Etruscans. They were totally different because they were actually respecting women just like native people. You know, the women had the same rights as men. And some of it did percolate into the Roman world. So having studied these things, when I was little, I didn't have that many tools to understand what the Christian religion had done. But to me, when I finally realized that, you know, the Library of Alexandria was destroyed by the Christians, that was enough to make me angry. Because they destroyed the first computer that was invented by the Greeks. So, I mean, in the 3rd century BC. So all the magnificent scientific progress we could have had was stopped by stupid church. Sorry to say this, because the message that came out of Christianity was a revolutionary message. And I understand why it was so, so successful, because there was the Middle Eastern world that was stuck into this revenge, continuous revenge. In India, there was the Hinduism, and then there was Buddhism, which started, you know, in the 7th century BC. But it talked about compassion. It didn't talk about love. And this guy suddenly comes up, whoever he was, it doesn't matter, talking about love, which was a new thing. Nobody had talked about that. Krishna had talked about love, it's true, but in a different way. You had to be attached to your deity. So then this person comes and everybody's the same. So there are no slaves, no nothing. We are all the same in front of God. So potentially that was a very nice thing. What the church has done of it is not. And I'm not going to say any more because that could go on and on. So
yeah, and I'm
sure I was burnt on the stakes at some point in my life. I'm sure of that. Don't remember it, and I don't particularly want that memory to come back, but you know, I think I was.
And to make a comment regarding the Library of Alexandria, I recently read somewhere that before it was burned down, all the historical documents, the important ones, were removed, and only the financial records were burned out. So again, could be true, could still be a lie, I don't know, but I read that this version is somewhere out there in the literature.
Some of it was remained, and it was brought to us by the Arabs. They were the first one to translate some of the text, and some of the things that they brought to Europe, actually, some of the most advanced scientific things were coming from Alexandria, what they had found. I don't know how they found it, but anyway, so it's just, I in the past, I studied all the religions because that's what I was interested in. When I was at high school, I studied all philosophies because I was so interested in understanding. And at university, I studied all the religions because that, again, I was very interested in how people had found a way to understand the world and explain it to themselves, you know, how they couldn't understand what was happening to them and what questions they were asking and why they were asking them. So this has been a lifelong choice of mine to be on this path of understanding. And I don't think I have a complete vision at all, but I have found a lot of beauty along the way. And I think that's good. I've also found very good monks and nuns, you know, not just Native American people. Yeah, everywhere, wherever I've been. I remember, for example, once when I first was doing Reiki, I even met a nun and a priest who were Reiki masters, and they were very, very nice, you know, from Poland. So I know random stuff like that. So yeah, you don't know. Good people are everywhere, and so you cannot. So it in general, no. And because of this, Joseph, I think he knew all of this even without me telling him. When he first came to Italy, he came to Rome and he said, "Oh, I want to go to St. Peter's." And I looked and I said, "No, you don't want to go to St. Peter. This is really the center of all this." And he said, "No, let's go." I said, "Okay." Yeah, so, and of course I was with him. I felt the energy even more. It was like all this. We won't go inside, and it was really intense. And you could tell that the place had been used for many things that were not of the best taste. Anyway, and then he wanted to go underground into the crypts where the popes were buried. And I said, "Okay, let's go." So when I went out, I and this other woman who was with us, I was just, my head was exploding, you know. And he just looked at me and said, "You know, there's a lot of energy in there, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, good, okay." That was it, done. Nothing told. So for a long time, we didn't talk about anything. And then one day I wrote to him and I said, "Joseph, I would like to know, what can I do to show you that, and to show myself that I am committed to what you're teaching me?" And he said, "Oh, there is something that you can do." And I said, "Yeah, go to St. Peter's." And I said, "What?" I said, "Go to St. Peter's, go on your knees, and on your knees, walk all the way from the door to the center of the church, go across and back again." And I spent months thinking about this. And I said, "Can I go to another church?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, if you want, you can, but I ask you to go to St. Peter's." You don't have to do it. Of course, you don't have to do it. You know, if you want, but you don't have to do it. So I said, "Okay. All right." So I think I spent 6 or 7 months thinking about this. And then during one of my mother's visits to Rome, and I said, "Look, Joseph has asked me to," my mother had met Joseph and she really thought he was wonderful. So I said, "Mom, he asked me to do this. Can you please come with me and I'll talk to the head of the people in charge of the church. We go early in the morning when there aren't too many tourists, and I'll tell him that I have to do this as a vow. I'm not going to tell him it's for a medicine man in America because, yeah." But anyway, and I went and he looked at me and said, "Of course, certainly. Don't worry about anything. There will be nobody on your path." So then I went down on my knees And that's it. That's when I suddenly realized what he wanted me to do, really wanted to, because I started crying like a baby. Even telling you about it, it's touching, because he wanted me to make peace with centuries of the church. He wanted me not to have this burden anymore. And I cried, and I think I cried for about half an hour on my knees. Then when I stopped crying and I could actually see, I started to do it all the way down, down, down. And then I had to go across, and he moved people out of the way. And I heard him saying, if it were me, she is doing a vow. If there were more people coming into the church for this, it would be better. I agree. But anyway, and then again, and my mother was on the other side of the church. She never interfered once. She was praying for me. She was supporting me with Reiki. And when I left, I felt so much lighter. I mean, so much happier. So now I told you what I think of the church, but now I can go to St. Peter's. It doesn't bother me anymore. In fact, I had very good energy experiences there. When most people feel terrible, now I go and I feel the light, because of this relationship that he has brought for us. And because I think that people like us need to go to these places to keep the light going also, So that's my story with St. Peter's.
Thank you for sharing. Beautiful, beautiful story. So, wow, quite unbelievable. And
Yes, I know.
going through so many experiences, spiritual experiences and ceremonies, have you unlocked light language? Can you speak light language?
I don't even know what that is. Like speaking in languages, you mean?
Yes, like some people refer to like tongues and vibrations from various races.
It has happened to me twice. Once in a dream, and it was not a dance, but it was a meeting of Reiki masters. But the energy was really, really high during a dream. And I remember when I woke up, I was speaking a language, but I had no idea what it was. And unfortunately, I didn't have anything to record it, so I don't know what it was. And another time during a dance, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. But again, I don't have a means to understand it. I'm not, as I said, I can tell you things when I have understood what their meaning is for me, but I'm not really sharing very much of other things that they're still giving me their meanings. And but one of the things that I can share is the beauty of the dances, because, the dances are 4 days long, and they're preceded by a sweat lodge, of course. And during the dance, you don't eat, you don't drink, you don't speak, which for Italians is a very difficult thing to do. Not so much for me, but when I did it in Italy, they were all speaking with their hands, so. And I was telling them, don't speak with your hands. And before starting the dance, we go around the circle of the dance for 4 times and for all the directions as a way of cleansing. And we whistle with our, that's a hollow bone whistle. And then we go inside and we start to dance with the drum. And the drum calls us to the different, and the different days and all this. But I always remember what he first told us. The first dance that I ever did was, there are only 2 positions in dancing. One is standing and dancing, and another one is lying down and dreaming. And that's what I've been doing, all the time. It's just lie down, dream, stand up and walk and dream sometimes at the same time. And as I was saying before, and traditionally the women were not dancing, but he has opened the dance to women, because sometimes women behave in ways where they forget that they are women. And so by doing the dance, it's a way of reminding themselves that they don't need to suffer. And the word suffer is naturally a word that I don't like so much, because to me it's not a sufferance, but I use the sacrificio, sacrum facere, which is the Latin for making sacred. So I make sacred a part of my life, and in order to make it sacred, I do it differently from everyday life. I don't eat, I don't drink, so I deprive myself of those things that are out of habit, And I just am with nature. And in fact, usually, I mean, my first few times, maybe the first years, but now after so many years, I don't feel hungry. Sometimes you may feel a little bit thirsty, but very rarely. Usually it's more the mind that wants the food, that wants other things, you know. So it's not so. And in
Yes.
fact, and you can just do it. It's not that difficult. I couldn't do it if I had to do it to lose weight, but if I can do it for the dance, it's not a problem, because I usually start eating less and less and less before the dance, because you cannot, you know, the first few dances I was eating like a pig until the last minute in case I was hungry afterwards, and it was a lot worse because you have to detox a lot more. But if you do it slowly, when you come to the moment of a dance, your body's clean and it's just ready to fly, and then, you know, time goes by very fast.
Yeah.
And you just dream and
Beautiful.
dream. Mm.
Antonella, you have a book coming out, Makahala, which means big time in Sanskrit. What can you tell us about it?
Well, Mahakala is this term that is referred to the great wheel of time. And that's why I thought it was appropriate for this. It was also the title of a radio program that I did for some time years ago, and where I was talking about Indian spirituality. And the radio was all about Celtic spirituality. So I was the guest, you know, the honorable guest. And that name stayed with me, because even if Mahakala is a term that is usually related to Shiva as the Lord of Time, the destroyer and the creator of the universe, and I am not so much a fan of Shiva, but that particular aspect, I thought it was very interesting for me. And the book is about how I have understood the medicine wheel. It's not a treaty on the medicine wheel, because I wouldn't dare, and I'm not a native person. And it's not a treaty on anything else. It's just my understanding of the unfolding of a spiritual life. And that's, and by using the metaphor of the medicine wheel, I can go through the points of the compass and explore. But since I am European, I use very different things. For example, in the South, I talk about Shiva Nataraja and Kali that dance on the place of cremation, which is not a very Native American thing to say. And I use the metaphors and the images that have touched me over the time, you know, that have made me one person. And in a way, it's an encouragement for other people to find their own path, you know, and to choose the form that works best for them. For example, whenever I talk about Joseph and this tradition, I always say that this is a tradition that has found me and has welcomed me. And I feel very honored by that. I didn't particularly look for it. It just happened. And the other things I looked for, but this one I didn't. And that, you know, I really love it. This form is the one that makes the most sense to me. But that doesn't mean that the others don't as well. So, and it's a very unusual journey, because I go from the East, usually enter into the medicine wheel from the East, which represents the dawn, the mental, the beginning of things, you know, the ego, the overview of everything. And you go to the South, to the emotional, and you go to the West, to, you know, the introspection and the winter's sleep. And then you go to the North. And in this case, I do it differently because that's how it came and I couldn't change it. I go from the East to the West on the Spirit Road. And I go on the Blue Road because I was always particularly touched by walking inside the medicine wheel and seeing that the light goes boom, straight to the West, where it's all dark. But without that light, you couldn't even see the dark. And Joseph has always talked about the dark matter, you know, so where everything comes from. So you have to go there. Otherwise, if you don't go there, nothing comes out of it. And then afterwards, I go to the north, the place of the ancestors, because they are the ancestors that place us in the south, in the place of birth. So this is my way of going through the medicine wheel. And then I talk about the center and, and more, and re-entering the wheel and walking in it, not as a circle anymore, but as a globe, as a sphere, as more and more. So it's it's my understanding of it so far, at least.
Wonderful.
It's taken me a long time because I started writing in 2011 and now it's 25. So yeah.
Yeah. Antonella, we are approaching the end of our lovely discussion. Any final words?
Be happy. Don't wait. Be happy.
Thank you very much for your time, for everything you shared with us. And I know that your spiritual experiences will continue because, as you said, you want to keep learning and finding out more about this life and what we consider our existence in this lifetime. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Grazie, Claudio.
Thank you. And for my viewers, thank you for watching. Share it, visit Gnostic TV and YouTube for older episodes. And until next time, love and gratitude.